Okay, afternoon everyone. It's good to be here again. Another Bible class that we are really pushing ahead in terms of the work we are covering. And I'm really happy that all of you are here today. I think we have our core team with us today, most of the people who are normally on. And so I just want to begin, I'll begin with a word of prayer, after which we will get into today's session. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for your blessings. We thank you for the word that you have given to us, even before we were born and way before our time, and yet it's still relevant today. We thank you for the discerning presence of the Holy Spirit as you lead us through these studies. May you continue to speak to our hearts and draw us all closer to you. It's our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. Okay, so today we want to continue Lesson 11, which was really our foray, if you will, into Daniel chapter 7, which is really some of the heat of the matter and the meat of the matter with respect to what we've been studying so far. So today I think we have a strong attendance again, both on YouTube as well as on Zoom, and I expect we have similar participants on Facebook now that we have started to stream on Facebook as well simultaneously. So we're happy for that. Let me say happy birthday to one of our regulars, Sister Olive. She is normally on with us every Sabbath, and we say to her happy birthday. And if she's not on by some chance today because she's celebrating somewhere, then we ask that those of you who know her can wish her happy birthday on behalf of the Bible class. All right? So let's get into our slides as we get into today's session. Today we continue our focus on the book of Daniel. And by the way, by now you'll appreciate that this signature slide, which is the slide for the Bible class and the overall theme, to the left of the slide, we actually pick up the characters and the beasts that are prominent in Daniel chapter 7. And you see the parallel with them with the image of Daniel chapter 2. So in a way, as we move into this section, we are actually covering what is indeed our theme slide that has been with us all through this Bible class. So we are continuing as we started last week. We are looking at Daniel chapter 7. And by the way, next week we will celebrate 3 months of our Bible class 2020. So I thank all of you for participating, and let's keep it going as we go forward. All right. So today we continue this look at particularly focus on the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. And that is now, you are very strong students of this. You understand that this is a parallel, if you will, between Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. And the parallel is such that basically what we are suggesting is that the flow or the sequence of nations that were depicted in Daniel chapter 2 is similar and identical, I want to say, flow of nations depicted in Daniel chapter 7. It's a significant amount of time between the two visions. In one case, the first vision was given to Nebuchadnezzar the king, and in this case, the vision is given to Daniel, a servant of God, but it covers the same material. I want to suggest to you, as we did sometimes in the past, that what was, or somebody saying no volume. No volume. Why is that? All right, are you hearing me better? If you are, just send me back a chat and let me know that you're hearing me. I just want to make sure, testing. Charlene, you're saying you're not hearing? Is anyone else hearing? Hello? I'm hearing it on. Right, so I think it's coming through. Is everyone hearing? If you are, just give me some kind of feedback, maybe from the chat. Or just let me know you're hearing. And if you're on YouTube, you can do the same. I think we are okay, you know. Oh, okay, okay. She says we are good now. Great, great. Thanks, everyone. So I think everybody said we look to be okay. Yes. Great, great. Good responses. All right. So yes, what we are saying, right, and I'm hearing on YouTube, everybody said they're hearing as well. So it clearly, I think we're ready to go. Everybody has organized. All right. So what we're saying is that in Daniel chapter 2, what we found was that we saw the sequence of world events from a purely political perspective. And really what we saw was a sequence of nations from Babylon to Media Persia to Greece to Rome, and then to what is modern day Europe, which is really what the feet of iron and clay is representing. And that sequence, which is primarily within the domain of the Mesopotamian Empire, the Mesopotamian Valley, the valley of the Tigris and Euphrates River, and within the areas we refer to this sometimes as the Middle East, and that fundamental area around there. That is the flow of nations that we discussed. And we said that the Bible deliberately focused on that because that is the nations around where Israel had settled in the land of Canaan. All right, so it is really related to that. So God showed in Daniel chapter 2 to a heathen king, Nebuchadnezzar, a king who did not observe theocracy and did not observe the God of heaven, but serve multiple gods. So we're not being judgmental when we call him heathen. We're simply being descriptive. It was, in truth and in fact, the way he worshipped. He worshipped many other different gods, etc. So God showed the heathen king the flow of nations within the Mesopotamian Valley. And in Daniel chapter 7, and what is the first year of Belshazzar, who will be the last king of Babylon, God returns to this theme, but he returns to his prophet Daniel, who is concerned about what will happen to Israel under this subjection that they are under Babylon, and who is made very well aware, given his predominance and his hierarchy within the Babylonian Empire. He's very well aware that Cyrus the Mede has been making overtures, and soon enough, he feels that Babylon as an empire will crumble. So it is in the context of such anxieties that God gives him a vision. And I must say to you that while we are happy that God visited Daniel and answered his anxieties, I want to suggest that what God told Daniel created even further anxiety. And that is going to be a recurring pattern in Daniel chapters 7, 8, and 9, where even in 10 and 11 and 12, where we will see where Daniel, when he receives these visions, he is troubled to the point where sometimes he's sick for many days and he cannot get up and walk. And he will actually talk about that in the chapter. So in Daniel chapter 7, we are having a return to this common theme, if you will, of the flow and succession of nations within the Mesopotamian Valley. But there is a distinct difference now in that God doesn't just say that the kingdoms will go from one to the next, but he kind of gives something about the characteristics of these kingdoms. He gives some more details around them through the beasts that they represent. And in doing that, he is also talking, especially when he gets to the fourth beast, a lot about how they have dominated God's people over time. And that is why in this slide, we have said that the crust of the vision seems to be, however, that's the last bullet, if you will. The vision of Daniel also involves God's people and their story from a religious perspective. So again, you are very, very familiar with this by now. We talked about it just now, and we said that the vision of the Daniel chapter 2 is representative of the metallic man, if you will, made of metal and mud, as some Bible preachers like they use when they do their crusade. The man of metal and mud, and that we are now living in the feet of iron and clay, which is effectively the divided Europe that exists today, and that eventually God will come and his kingdom will last forever. And then we discussed that really, I would like to say, even though I have 5 bullets here, there are really three significant sections of the book of Daniel chapter 7. The first section, of course, is just the parade of the four beasts that we know represent the same sequence of kingdoms, which is Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then we will talk a little bit, as we are doing today, about the little horn, which is a key part of that whole vision. And then interspersed within the vision is a judgment scene, which we'll focus on next week. And that is extremely important because the judgment scene seems to find itself almost out of sorts in this vision of beasts and kingdoms. But if we examine it very carefully, which is going to be your homework for next week, if we examine it very carefully, we realize that there is a lot of correlation between having this vision of a judgment and the judgment going in a particular way that is related to this flow of kingdoms that seem to dominate God's people as they move along the way, right? We talked about the vision itself, and then this is revision because we did all of this last week. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. We clearly identified that the lion is representative of Babylon. So that is important. I have a question coming here, right? It says, so somebody's asking, and they have admitted that it is a little bit off topic, but I will just deal with it very quickly. So the person wanted to know if any man will know the day and the hour of crisis coming. And they asked this because they read in some reading some author Ellen White, in which she said that she saw in the vision that God will tell the saints by thunder when he will return from the earth, but his unseen will not be able to understand. So let me just answer that very quickly and say to you, nobody knows the day or the hour when Christ would come. And that is a direct quote from the book of Matthew, chapter 24. What I can tell you, though, is that obviously one of the reasons we are studying the prophecies is that as we study the prophecies and we begin to see the sequence of events, we begin to appreciate that we are closer and closer to Christ's second coming. So for instance, if we went back to the slides that we showed a little bit earlier, where we showed this slide, there is no doubt that we are now living in a period of a divided Europe. So there is a reasonable expectation that we are living in a time when we should expect Christ to come soon. Is it going to be tomorrow? I don't think so. Is it going to be next week? Maybe not. But is it going to be in our lifetime? We don't know. And in that sense, we can say we do not know when he would come, but we can also say that there is sufficient signs in the environment to suggest. For this whole week, I thought rain was coming because I saw the place hazy and stuff that suggested that it was going to rain. Later we found it was Sahara dust, and even though it looked hazy and cloudy, it was not rain. But the fact is, when you see the sky set up, as we like to refer to in the Caribbean, like that, then it is clear indication that something is going to happen, rain is going to fall. And I'm suggesting that as we study these prophecies of successive kingdoms, and we realize that where we are in terms of the succession is at the end of the line, we begin to realize that we are very close to when Christ will come a second time. I hope that kind of gives you some answer within context, because you easily admitted that it was a little bit off topic, but certainly in the context of what we are studying, I think that is kind of where I would like to land on that issue. So we said that the lion represented Babylon, the winged structure suggested how fast it moved. We said that the bear represented the Mede and the Persian Empire, the three ribs represented Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt, which were three nations that they conquered as they moved forward. So that's important. Greece, we know, is a kingdom that moved extremely fast. So we see four wings, but we also see four heads because we knew that after Alexander the Great died, the kingdom broke up into control by his four generals, Ptolemy, Seleucid, and others. and that becomes extremely important. I told you that later on, they eventually evolve into not just 4 kingdoms, but effectively 2 strong kingdoms, one to the north and one to the south. And when we get to Daniel chapter 10 and 11, we will return to the kings of the north and the kings of the south, and more particularly some very, very, very important stuff around what happens with the kings of the north and the kings of the south. All right. So again, and then we came to Rome, which we said was started before Christ's time, BC, but it also continued after Christ into the 5th century, which was AD 476. So this is the extent of the Roman Empire. But we agreed. I think by now you are good Bible students, and we all agreed that this depiction of Rome in this time period is really a little bit misleading, because this speaks to the depiction of Western Rome up to the 5th century. But Eastern Rome continued, Constantinople, Istanbul today, Turkey as we know it today. That Eastern aspect of the Roman Empire continued, but to a large extent, Western Rome was unrecognizable by the 5th century because the barbarian tribes had invaded and they had overrun the areas that were controlled by Italy and Greece and what we know as Western Europe today. They were all really given over to the barbarian tribes. And consequently, we would like to say that the Roman Empire came to an end. But I always like to give you that qualification. And when we say that, we're really saying the Western Roman Empire, because the Eastern Roman Empire continued. And the fact that Eastern Rome continued introduces us to the little horn power, which comes out of the overall beast image. So therefore it is part of the beast image. And we said that what emerged after the 5th century in Western Europe was what we call a religiopolitical empire, which was really run by the Roman Church, the Roman Christian Church, which was, of course, a Christianity now that was somewhat corrupted and polluted. And so you found that there was existence of the dominant or normal Christian church, which was run by the Bishop of Rome, who, of course, today is known as a Pope, and even in those days was known as a Pope. So the Bishop of Rome was the head of the church, and the Bishop of Rome had more than just religious power. Further to the 5th century, the Bishop of Rome had political power as well. So that gave it a very strange construct. And again, like I told you, that is not so unheard of, because even today, the Vatican in Rome is considered to be a state on its own doing, and therefore the Pope is considered to be a head of state. When he visits a country, he visits not just as a religious authority, but he's given normally a head of state kind of greeting, red carpet and military escorts, etc. Because he's a head of state. He's literally a head of state in today's world. And that small area he controls in the Vatican is really small, very, very small compared to what happened in the 5th century all the way to the 18th century, when you found that the Bishop of Rome or the Pope would have had great political power in addition to religious power. And that marrying of church and state became important during the period that we call the Dark Ages, when things were really bad and people persecuted, but the church had significant power. So we can argue that out of, and I am not making the argument, the historians have done that already, that out of political Rome emerged a new construct, a new political entity that really is known as religio-political Rome, that is represented by the little horn. And that is where we land in our discussions today, right? So we read all the verses. He said I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up out among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by their roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great pompous words. He shall be different from the first ones. He shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. He shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change time and laws. This is all Daniel chapter 7:25. Then the saints shall be given to his hand for time and half of time, right? And then we looked at a review of the Roman Empire, and we went back to our map that we now have very clear in our heads is what we call, and some of you answered the question when we discussed it in our poll. There'll be no, by the way, there'll be no poll today. Some of you who have great apprehension over the polls, I want to give you a sense of assurance today. There'll be no poll today. We'll see what next week brings. So around the Mediterranean basin, which is where the Mediterranean Sea exists, you had, if you will, the Roman Empire more to the north of the basin than the south, but to the south there were also areas that they controlled in northern Africa that was part of the Roman Empire. And then to the east you had parts of Arabia or the Middle East that is now, that was part of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was pretty big, and we discussed the fact that there was a Western Rome and an Eastern Rome. So that I told you just now that when we said Rome and the time frame we saw there is up to AD 476, we are very, very clear that that is more Western Rome because Eastern Rome continued. The other thing to remember is that Western Rome would have effectively adopted Latin as their mother tongue because Italy was the home of where Latin would have originated, if you will, and be predominant or concentrated, for whatever better word. And in Eastern Rome, they were using more the Greek language, all right? So those are very clear things. And then the other thing we wanted to remind you is that out of this little piece of land here, where Jesus would have lived and walked in his years on earth, Christianity grew and spread truly into the earth, which is really, really phenomenal. All right? Again, quick review. I told you that Daniel is purposely presenting a very one-side view of Rome through this beast that is defined description and looks very, very ominous. That is deliberate, notwithstanding the fact that that Rome gave us a lot to make our civilization what it is today, right? We learned a lot from the Romans in terms of even our bicameral system of parliament with the upper and the lower house has its roots and its origin in Rome. We had the Pax Romana, which was a period of peace when the Romans were living almost in peace around the Mediterranean basin, and a lot of stuff advanced in the first 2 centuries. And then Paul himself was somebody who was very proud of the fact that he was a Roman citizen, right? So notwithstanding the good things that Rome would have accomplished as a civilization and an empire over the years, the Bible is depicting in Daniel and Revelation what we call terrible and dreadful Rome, simply because Rome would have, under Rome's rule and domination, some very significant events occurred with respect to God's people and with respect to the rule of law as God would have established it and what we understand to be strong biblical truths. All right, so that is important. And that is what I just wanted to re-emphasize. Don't worry about all the going through to read the slides. You did that last week, so we want to keep moving because we want to get to where we stopped last week, and we're making good time so far. All right, we were very clear that one of the things that resulted in Rome being called terrible and dreadful was the fact that they persecuted Christians. And you may say to me, well, how can Rome be a Christian nation and persecute Christians? And one of the things you have now accepted, as we have studied over the past 2 to 3 weeks and even more, that that Rome eventually adopted Christianity as its own religion, but it soon started to practice what we have now understood to be syncretism, which is it brought in various practices, some other religions, other beliefs, other rites and cultures into the church. And as a result, it created a sort of, what evolved was a hybrid of Christianity that had Christianity in it, yes, but it also inculcated a lot of beliefs. Some the other nations are wrong and some of the barbarian tribes, etc. To the point that a few Christians, and not a few, but a lot of Christians felt that the church was not representative of what Jesus and the apostles taught. And as a result, they pulled themselves away. And you could argue, as I told you, that there was the official Christian church, and then there were what we like to call true believers. And those true believers were living in the shadows. They were constantly persecuted. And there were periods of systematic or methodical persecutions. There was one under Nero in AD 60. There was another one in AD 250. And then Diocletian had another systematic persecution in AD 303 to 313. But then came Constantine, who was really a powerful emperor and who won a battle because he saw a cross and he made the assumption and the correlation that Christianity was the one that helped him win his battle. As a result, he was very, very favorable towards Christianity. He first blessed the religion and gave it a place of prominence in the empire. And then later on, he did more than that. He not just gave it a place of prominence, but he himself converted to Christianity and basically facilitated a lot of the Christian beliefs throughout the empire. And so the Bishop of Rome flourished under Constantine, and because they had the political forces with them, the church was able to attack, if you will, and subdue all its detractors, all of those who felt that they were against what the church wanted them to do. Some of you within the Adventist Church will know that there are some similar things occurring in Burundi right now in Africa, where there's some support for a renegade aspect of the church leadership from the state. But that's something you could research on your own and you could begin to see the correlation. So post-Constantine, the Christian empire also persecuted Christians. So I'm saying to you that in the context of a nation and an empire that did so much in persecuting God's people, they are depicted quite rightfully as a terrible and dreadful nation. Again, I'm moving through very, very fast here because we've done this before. What we said is that one of the things that characterized the religio-political Rome was apostasy and persecution. We talked about the persecution a while ago. The apostasy is clear that in the church adopting belief systems in paying for indulgences, believing in life after death and being able to move your body through from purgatory into a better place through mass and stuff after you die. All of those beliefs, the holy and canonization, if you will, of Sunday as a day of worship, because it was a day of the sun that some of the heathens believed. All of that came in together under the Roman Empire. So apostasy, which is really going against what is believed as the true church and the true beliefs, and persecution were two of the characteristics, if you will, that characterize the Roman church. So having said all that, I think it's important for us to move, if we can, to where we were last week. And I wanted to just continue on that and tell you that religio-political Rome is the little horn of the fourth beast, right? We studied all of that. I won't go back. What I gave up was the history, which you did so much before. So I won't go through all this again. I just wanted to remind you that these were some of the things that we looked at, right? So I'm jumping these slides because we did that last week. And I'm getting to this one. I hope I haven't confused anybody. And I know when these slides move fast, you kind of lose your bearings. I just want to go back to my slow moving slides again, right? It's like the bright lights you see on some of those TV shows. I hope nobody fainted on me while we went there. All right, so the fact that I'm establishing here a very strong premise and conclusion that religio-political Rome, which was the version of the church that emerged after the 5th century, is the little horn of the fourth beast of the Roman Empire. All right, so that is extremely important. So again, if I can just do a quick outline, you would have found that after Constantine, the church would have flourished and the emperors would have flourished, but the barbarians who were on the perimeter of Rome decided to make incursions, and by the 4th century, the barbarians had invaded most of Rome and they really had established about 10 tribes, if you will, that would have come in and taken control of the Roman Empire. 3 of them ended up, there were some alliances between the Bishop of Rome, and eventually he was able to subdue 3 empires, Ostrogoths, Vandals, and Heroni. And soon they were no longer in existence, and the Pope kind of took over and became the head of that area politically as well as a religious head. And so that fulfilled the prophecy that said 3 horns would make way for this kingdom, this little horn. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the political side of Rome. And so we said there were 4 identifying marks, right? One is that it will arise out of the 4th beast. It will appear after the 10 horns. It started small but became bigger than its fellows. It was plucked down by 3 kings so that it could survive. And last week, we'll cover this, but we did this last week. I just want to remind you that if you looked at the Mediterranean Sea and Western and Europe, you would see where these 10 tribes are scattered all over the place, right? But what you would find is that what emerges today is that most of them have become the modern nations of Europe, but 3 of the tribes are no longer this one, and this one. Ostrogoths, Heruli, and Vandals are nowhere represented on this list of modern day nations because they gave way, if you will, to the Roman Church. All right, so this is clear. I mean, this is just straight history. This is not us putting any slant on this. This is a historical fact that the Roman Empire gradually gave way to Christianity. Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople in the east. By 376, the 12 tribes had invaded the empire and weakened it forever. And then what we found is that there was a series of treaties, if you will, between the church and some of the nations to the extent that eventually 3 of the barbarian nations were destroyed. And this is what we had discussed. So by 538, a Roman emperor by the name of Justinian would have granted to the head of the church powers that were really the kind of powers you would put in an emperor. But because the east of Rome was so far and they couldn't control west at the same time, given all the many advances by the barbarian tribes, and because the barbarian tribes still had a kind of respect for the church, Justinian said, look, let us give the Bishop of Rome political power, civil power, so that he can manage stuff on our behalf. And he will still give his allegiance, if you will, to the Roman emperor who sits in Eastern Rome. And that was fundamentally the deal that allowed for this thing to happen. So today now, having a start, that's where we got to last week. I know it looks like we flew through this a while ago, but last week it took a long time to get here. So now I want to talk about the religious and civil authority of Rome, and I want to suggest to you that some of the deep interpretations we'll encounter in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25 will identify this. So we talked about the fact that the horn will come out of the 4th beast, appear after the 10 horns, started small, but arose to be bigger than its fellows, and it put down 3 kings. So far, so good. Like I said to you last week, arose out of the 4th beast, the Roman Catholic Church come out, and I say Roman Catholic Church, you know what I mean by that, because I told you that the Roman Catholic Church is a remnant of that early Christian church that we all were part of. So that when we say that, we don't really mean it in a derogatory way, we are simply recognizing the historical significance of that. So certainly it came out of Rome, which was the 4th beast. Certainly it appeared after, in terms of appeared, I may say appeared, there was a Christian church before the 10 horns, but after the 10 horns, the Christian church gained political and religious power. So that is what happened in 538 when Justinian said to the Pope, look, we can control the West. You handle down there, and you look after the people, and you look after their welfare, and I will give you troops which you could control, and you will manage them and all your governors, etc. So it appeared after the 10 horns. Of course, it started small, but the church became extremely big and became bigger than its fellows in terms of the reach of the church and how much control it had. And it had to put on 3 kings in order for it to establish itself, which we discussed, right? So you are now full versed on this, and you are heroes, and you could go and tell everybody about what you have identified. So let's talk about the other identifying marks, because the verses did not stop there. It said it had, in verses 8 and 25, it said it had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things, and it spake words against the Most High. Let's stop there for a while. The chapter or the narrative is suggesting that this little horn that emerged out of the 4th beast after the 10 horns will have eyes like the eyes of a man. Now, that is extremely significant, because it is saying that when it described the other nations before, it didn't get into that kind of detail, but there is almost a deliberate attempt by God, who is giving this vision to Daniel, to try to get him to understand that this is a special kind of kingdom that will pop up, right? So it will have eyes like the eyes of a man. So that is important, which means that there's going to be some intelligence and some focus and some deliberate action around this empire. And it'll have a mouth speaking great things, so we should look out for what will help us identify how this kingdom, this political, religio-political power spoke great things first of all, and then it will speak words against the Most High. There is no magic here as to who the Most High is. The Most High refers to God. So this is Daniel referring to God as the Most High. So it seems to suggest that there will be some identifying mark where we will see in this religio-political power, which is the Roman Church with political power attached to it, it will some or the other start to say stuff that is extremely great and powerful, but it will also say stuff that is against the Most High. It will wear out the saints of the Most High. Well, this one is not hard to solve as a riddle, because if you say the saints of the Most High, and it will wear it out, it means that it will destroy or persecute the people of God. That's what this means. So that is easy, because we already discovered that the Roman church as a political power also persecuted the people of God who were against what the church had become. It will think to change time and laws. It didn't say it will change it, but it said it will think to change it. So it may do stuff that is seemingly attempting to change sometimes and laws. We'll talk about that. And then it says it will be allotted its special powers for a specific period, a time, 2 times, and half a time. So these are 4 critical marks that I didn't want to rush into last week, and I thought we should spend any time on today. Can we find within our construct of world powers, according to Daniel chapter 7, can we find identifying marks of the religio-political Rome after the 5th century that is such that it will have speak great things against God and against mankind, or behave like a great force? Will it wear out the saints? Will it persecute the saints? Will it seek to change time and laws? And will it be given its dominance for what is described as a time, 2 times, and half a time? So let's look at what the translation says. And I'm for each of these identifying marks, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. So for each of these, I'm going to examine each of these in detail. And for each of them, I will quote the text that describes these words. And then we will go to the historical records that are very predominant all over the internet and in books all over the place. And we will see if we can find a correlation to help us be able to check mark what we have discovered here. So Daniel 7:25 says, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. So let's see if we can find that relationship. All right, so speaking great things and greater than his fellows. So the historians are saying to us that after AD 538, there were many battles of power and supremacy in Europe. But as most historians recognize, the Roman Empire gave way to the Roman Catholic Church. So let me just talk about this a little bit. Obviously, AD 538 is when the Emperor Justinian says to the Bishop of Rome, you will control the West for us. You will be our emissary. You will be our vice regent. You'll be the one who in charge of this area. And the church may have said, okay, well, how can I do that? I don't have the armies. And he said, no, I'm going to give you the armies. So whatever Roman legions and stuff remain down there, they'll be under your control. He says, okay, fine. Do I have civil power? Can I pass laws? Can I make directions to the people? He said, of course. So all the judges, all the governors, etc., they will report to you. So effectively, the head of the church in Rome emerged slowly but surely as a political power. Now I say that to deal with this statement that is here, because there's a vacuum that is created when the barbarians dive in. And obviously somebody will try to say, well, I am the most dominant tribe. And so there were a lot of battles that were taking place. And if you watch any of those old movies, you would see that they always depict battles between various regions and various kings and kingdoms, etc. So there was a lot of battles between there, but what emerged as a continuity of Rome, if you will, was the Roman Church. So the Roman Church, the Christian Church, the Roman Church, and Catholics that simply means it's now universal. The Roman Christian Church emerged as the dominant and cohesive force coming out of Rome after all these things. All right, so all that's good so far, but we still have to answer the question about speaking great things. So what happened? And look at the time period now. In 1076, this is almost 500 years after 538 AD, right? So in 1076, by now, it's well established that the Pope or the head of the church is a political power. And even though there are kings existing all over the place in the various kingdoms of Europe, and they all different tribes are having their stuff, Rome has itself, because it's taken on a very important flow. The barbarian tribes are not politically aligned to the church, but they pay homage to the church because they realize that all their subjects, all the people in the area are basically given, listening to what the church has to say. So that's extremely important. And you see that happening with politicians and stuff a lot, especially now that they're approaching our political elections and stuff. You will start to see some political parties aligning themselves with churches and religions and wanting to attend services in mosques and temples and in churches, if only because they feel that if the religious leaders show that they are in support of them, then the followers of the religious leaders will also follow them. So in 1076, Pope Gregory VII, he informed King Henry V. He told his subjects that if Henry doesn't repent of his sins, they don't have to obey him. And that's a powerful thing. Is that a great thing? Of course it is. Because here is the church taking on what was the role of the emperor. But you're not surprised at this, because you and I know that in our previous lessons we said that when we quoted from a book by a guy called Gonzalez, we said that there were two things that the church did, was that they did syncretism, but the Romans adopted emperor worship. In other words, the emperor was considered to be supreme. So if the church is now a political power, a religio-political power, then the Pope has real hierarchy associated with them and reverence associated with them. So in 1076, he told the people of what is now the UK, look, if your king doesn't repent of his sins, don't obey him. Now, that's a real rebellious thing to happen to a nation. It's almost as if we have run a coup, right? So the king, Henry, made a pilgrimage to Cano Sava in the Alps where Gregory was. And he waited 3 days barefoot in the snow until the Pope forgave him, right? So the Pope was really leveraging a lot of power in that period. And that's just an example of that. And that's just one of many, right? Pius V also, he was another pope. He forbid all subjects of Queen Elizabeth. This is now 1,000 years maybe after 538 AD in 1570. He forbids all subjects of Queen Elizabeth to obey her, right? So clearly, those are examples of great things. And I mean, I'm giving you just a few. In 1890, which was a very important period, when there was a lot of documentation that emerged around how the people of the church felt about their leadership, etc. Leo the Eighth, he asserts that the supreme teacher, so this is a pope who is writing to his people in 1890. So he's talking, looking back, he's saying that is the Roman pontiff. Therefore, we need to have complete submission and obedience to the will of the church, to the Roman pontiff, as to God himself. As to God himself. So we need to pay attention to that. That is a strong thing. Just take a mental note of that. I mean, it's one thing you tell your church that they must pay attention to their leaders and listen to what they have to do. But here it is, they're saying that they must see the head of the church as God himself, right? And then Pope Julius V, in one of the councils in 1517, he said that that he was like another God on earth. That's great things. Official position of the Roman Catholic Church, the popes had the place of God Almighty on earth. So that is to me just a brief indication that not only were they speaking great things, but they were speaking great things against the Most High. But that's important because when you read the 10 Commandments, the first commandment kind of says, I am the Lord thy God that brought you to the land of Egypt. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not have any graven images before me, etc. God is a God who values the fact that he's the only God. And if anybody is to represent God, it must be Jesus. And that's why Jesus actually was crucified, because the Jews said, hey, you cannot come here and say you are God. And even though he really was God, if anybody could have come and said that was Jesus, the Jews persecuted him because in their mind, he was committing blasphemy. As a matter of fact, when the Jews carried, read it in John, right? And in the last days of Jesus before he was crucified, when the Jews carried Jesus to be crucified, and they brought him before Pilate, Pilate said, I can't find anything wrong with this fellow, why you all bring him here by me? And they said, well, all right, you can't find anything wrong, but we have a law. And in our law, because he claims to be the king of the Jews and he claims to be God himself, he is blaspheming our law, and therefore he needs to be put to death. And that was the basis upon which they crucified Jesus, because he disobeyed Jewish law, not so much Roman law, but Jewish law, right? So here it is. During the Middle Ages, during the period post 538 AD, the church in its religious political role begins to take on definitions and take on roles, if you will, that are of an emperor nature on earth. But then more than that, so that's why it says speak great things and then things against the Most High. So the great things, it is like an emperor. He says to a king, look, tell his people, don't serve this king, don't worship him. He tells them, don't worship Queen Elizabeth, etc. That is great things. And then he takes on names and designations, if you will, that are against the God of heaven. And that is extremely important. And in that context, we have satisfied a requirement that says, speaking things, great things, and shall speak words against the Most High. Check. All right? Maybe I should have put that after each of these slides. The other thing is to note, and you can ask me any questions as we go along, right? So then verse 25 is kind of a summary verse that is really important. It says, "He shall speak great words against the Most High." So we have established that, right? He felt that there is like God on earth. He feels that he is a representative of God. He's the only one. Now that might sound innocuous and say, well, what is wrong with that? No big thing if the head of the church is representing God on earth. But the fact of the matter is all of us have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And God specifically didn't want anybody to represent him. All right, in the Old Testament days when they practiced theocracy, the prophets were messengers of God. They were not meant to represent God. They were not meant to stand in place of God. And so by offering indulgences and asking people to pay for repentance and that kind of stuff, the church started to put itself in the place of God. And that is something that the scriptures views with great disdain. It says he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Well, no point in guessing for that one. You know the answer for this. People were burned to the stake. People stuff in stacks and drown them. They beat people to death. People were hung in midair for weeks. And I mean, crucifixion was a Roman invention. So the Romans were accustomed with persecuting people and beating them into submission, right? By the 12th century AD, torture had become accepted in the church's courts. So these were all historical truths that the Western Roman Church, and indeed it moved into East as well when they went to the Crusades and stuff. They persecuted a lot of people. So that one is easy to check on. Thing to change time and laws. Let's talk about that one. So in 1400, one of the documents said the Pope can modify divine law since his power is not of man but of God. So the church was given, now remember during this period as well, the printing press is not there yet, yeah? So we don't have an explosion of information. So people depend upon the church. Now we advocate very clearly that one of the biggest changes that the church instituted was to change the day of worship, or the day of the Sabbath, let me say that, from Saturday to Sunday. Now, before you turn off in your mind, those of you who are not Seventh-day Adventists, let me just be clear and give you the balanced approach. By the time we got into the early centuries, after Christ's death, the early Christians indeed wanted to celebrate, use Sunday as a day of worship, because the Jews had made Saturday very onerous and overbearing. And so nobody felt happy about coming to church and the synagogue on a Sabbath day. So they did both actually. So in the early centuries, the Christians did both. They will observe the Sabbath on the Sabbath day, on the 7th day of the week, and then on the 8th day, or what they call the 8th day or the first day of the week, which was Sunday, they would also worship, and they found that to be a more glorious experience. And then later on, they started to write and suggest that because it was Jesus's day of resurrection, maybe that should be the most important day. And then by the time Constantine came, and Constantine came around 312, 321, etc. And he kind of started to bring the church into prominence. He recognized that there were a lot of believers in the sun god in the heathen nations who, if they could see a common day of worship with the Christians, then they would easily convert to Christianity. And so that is why he passed laws that says you should not work on the Sunday and everything should stop, etc. Because Constantine was hoping that if he got the people to see he was recognizing Sunday from their observance of the sun, and the Christians were also able to get them to come to church, then he would be the most popular man around, and indeed he was. So it's important to recognize as well that the church doesn't flinch, if you will, from accepting the accountability for having changed the day of worship. And that is, and I want to use that as my pivot to this key point. So I'm going to say that to you very clearly and very slowly again. I'm saying to you that historically, the church, the Catholic Church, the Roman Christian Church, has not been apologetic in saying in their writings and in the historical records that they are the ones who have changed the day of worship from Sabbath to Sunday. All right. And so one of the best ways to understand that is to appreciate what happened in 1517. So in 1517, which is the 16th century, Martin Luther emerges. Martin Luther looks at the church and he says, hey, see all of this thing you're all doing? He's able to identify 95 areas in which the church was moving away from the Bible. And so he said, and we discussed that last week, he put out this philosophy enshrined in the Latin words sola scriptura, meaning the Bible and the Bible alone. All right, sola meaning only and scriptura meaning the Bible. So Luther put out these 95 theses. He laid them on the wall of the church in Wittenberg, and he says to the people, this is wrong. The church is selling indulgences. The church is doing stuff that makes people, that hides the fact that God is in heaven willing to ask to forgive them, the fact that they must pay for penances and stuff to get forgiveness. And then he reminded them that the just shall live by faith, because he quoted that very special text in Romans where Paul says the just shall live by faith. And so Luther kind of really started the Protestant revolution, and the Protestant churches grew out of that. So all of us, again, owe our existence, all of us non-Catholic churches, we owe our existence to Luther and for the work that he started and continues today through the Lutherans, but out of that emerged other Protestant streams up to today. And we have all the different Presbyterians and Protestant religions, etc., that came out of the work of Luther. Now, interestingly, even though Luther is going against the church, look what one advocate said to him, right? A fellow called Johann Eck, Catholic theologian. He told Luther, he says, Scripture teaches to observe the 7 days as a Sabbath, but you and your followers worship on Sunday. When in reality, the church has changed its Sabbath to Sunday, not the Bible. So he's basically suggesting that how could you say you are against the church when in truth and in fact you too are observing a Sunday as your day of worship, which was something we changed. And so he kind of throws some holes in Luther's arguments to suggest that, and it's interesting that even though Luther would have encouraged a lot of the changes that we have seen that created the Protestant movement, he really continued to observe Sunday as a day of worship, and he never saw the 7 day Sabbath as being special and significant, right? So again, in the 1890s, which was a period when a lot of writings were being captured in printing press, etc. And I gave you a quote earlier from 1890. Again, this is something that came out of one of the writings in the church where it says the church for over 1,000 years before the existence of a Protestant. So they're quite right, because the existence of a Protestant occurred in 1517 with Luther. So this is way before that, by virtue of a divine mission, changed the day from Saturday to Sunday. So think to change time and laws. Why do we call it time and laws? Well, the fact of the matter is that the fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And then it qualified that by saying 6 days I shall labor and no labor, but then the 7th day, which is the Sabbath. So the 7 day Sabbath, which was something that was observed way before Christ, into Christ's time, and then after Christ as well. The church changed and says, no, let's move. And with good reason, I told you. When I say good reason in their minds, and we'll come to that in a bit, because there's no reason to change God's laws. Let me just be very clear about that when I say good reason. In their head, they thought it was good reason. One, they were bringing everybody under a common banner, and everybody could feel together under the Christian church. So we're bringing in the numbers of all these sun-worshipping people. And then two, because of what the Jews were doing and creating all this drama, they found that it was gradual to kind of differentiate Christians from Jews. And since Jews were observing the 7 day Sabbath, then Christians will observe the first day of the week. That may sound reasonable, but in the eyes of God, if there is no justification for making a change. So I just want to go through quickly some brief slides around that change. This was a depiction of Constantine in 321, where he issued a civil law, because this is now before 538, so this is actually the emperor making this law. He's introducing a civil law where he is designating Sunday as a day of rest. They had all been sun worshippers, and so it was easier for them. So everybody was okay with that. It was a day in which you will observe the sun. And I want you to know that those changes were not, you get up one morning and say, let me just worship on a Sunday. It was gradual, right? The Jews were persecuted. Some Christian leaders wanted to distinguish themselves from the Jews. So when Constantine passed the first Sunday law, it was to unite the empire. Because if every Christian was worshiping on Sunday, then you know if you're a Sunday worshiper, you're not a Jew, right? And so he passed this law that says, on the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and the people reside in the cities and all workshops be closed, etc. So clearly, that requirement, if you will, to think to change time and laws is now fulfilled. All right? So we are saying that in attempting to change the times and the laws, we are recognizing that that was also an identifying mark of the religious political power that came out of the Roman Empire. Everybody with me so far? Okay, so let's see if we can get to the other identifying mark, right? So the other one says, so we have picked up three so far. Let me just go over them with you very slowly and very carefully. One, we have said that he will speak the religious political power. The little one will speak great things and speak great things against the Most High. And I'm saying to you that when the religious political form of Rome emerged after 538 AD, the Bishop of Rome took on the status of an emperor, and he started to command people not to worship their own kings because he had given an order. And then the other thing we learned is that in taking on titles that said that he was a god on earth or representative of God, he was speaking against the Most High. That was not God's intent. He shall wear all the saints of the Most High was the identifying mark. Well, we didn't need to spend too much time on that because we are all aware that persecution occurred of the church's people during this period. And then the third one we said is that he will seek to change time and laws. And we're saying that given the fact that the change of thinking of the Sabbath from the seventh day to the first day of the week occurred under the Roman Empire and was cemented under the Roman Empire. And even after Luther's Protestant movement, they were still seen as having changed the day as a church and not being afraid to claim ownership and accountability for that. That we could very well identify and classify, seek to change time and laws, also to that religious political power. And the last one was the one that says, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and dividing of times. So what I did here in this slide is that I gave you two translations, right? So one says, I think this is what the King James Version says, and it shall be given into his hand a time and times and divided of times. So I wanted to clarify this a little bit more. And if you looked at what I think this is the English Standard Version, it says the holy people, or the New International Version, shall be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. So we need to examine what this means. And this is a very interesting identifying mark that to me sums up in very clear ways that God was identifying this religio-political Rome from way back into Daniel's time. So the word times must be understood as dual, hence two times, right? I told you that there is a Arabic word for time, which was translated as year. So when they use the word time, it is not by chance, it is not arbitrary. This is not to speak about time in a very general sense. This is very specific. So when Daniel uses this word until a time and times and the divine of times, and that is translated by the biblical authors and the biblical theologians to read into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. there is something very specific taking place here. And the very specific thing is that that word that is translated time, Idan, if you will, is really a word that means the year in Aramaic, right? So the Jews, therefore, would have occupied a period when they were observing 29 and a half days for a year. And don't worry about all the detail around this, but they had what they call a lunar year and a solar year. And on the basis of that, if they were following a solar year, they would, because they look at the cycles that the sun made, then they would end up with 365 days. If they followed a lunar year, they would end up with 354 days. When we are doing prophecy, the prophetic writers over the years have approximated this 295 to 30 days. So basically, in biblical prophecy, a year is 360 days. I want you to just swallow all of that slowly, and let me just go over it again. I'm saying that by the time of Daniel, and by the time we got into the early centuries, there was a lunar year which the Jews observed. They had a lunar calendar. So look at these cycles from new moon to full moon, etc. And they came up with a 29 and a half day cycle. And they had a full year therefore of 354 days. And then if you followed what was a classical Roman view around a solar year, you end up with 365 days. For prophetic interpretation, when we see years and days represented, and this is simply because when it comes up in Revelation, we are told 42 months, and then we are told 1260 days, right? When you use that, it is normal to assume 30 days for a month. All right, so if you did that, that is kind of what this is representing. Now I'll come back to it. Just swallow that for now, and I'll come to what that means, right? So if you go back to Revelation 11, and then when I say go back, that means go forward, right? I told you that he made reference to 42 months and to 1260 days, right? So let's think about that. So these time periods, if we said that Justinian gave the Bishop of Rome religious power, political power in 538 AD, and we assume that this thing here is really a year, and times, again, in their timing meant plural, but it didn't just mean plural, it meant dual. So this means 2 years, and a dividing of time means half a year, as it was translated here. So again, I hope I'm not confusing anybody, but this is really saying that this beast will have dominion over these people and control them for a year, 2 years, and half a year. So if you add all that up, it's really for 3.5 years. 3.5 years at 30 days for a month will give you 1260 days. And you know that in prophecy, we assume, when we went back to Ezekiel and Numbers, we assume that 1 day is equal to a year. So we're saying that from 538 AD, when Justinian would have established this, to 1260 years after, which will carry to AD 1798, is when this Roman bishop would have full control. Well, that looked like arbitrary maths, eh? But look what happens in history. So let's go to the next slide and see if we can take that up and get it correct, right? So 1 time plus times plus half a time. And I told you that is equal to 3.5 times. Everybody okay with that? Because 1 time is what the scripture said in 725, plus times, but I told you when it uses times, it really means dual, not necessarily more than twice times. So that's 2 plus half a time. So that's 3.5 times. If our time is a year, then we have to at least say in 1 year plus 2 years plus half a year, which is really equal to 3.5 years. You okay with that? 3.5 years is really 42 months. And 42 months at 30 days a month is 1,260 days. You could do the maths on the side if you just want to check me. In 538 AD, Justinian delivered Rome from the Ostrogoths, and he gave the Pope power over the city of Rome. So that was when he really kind of took control of things, right? And then in 1798, a general by the name of Berthier, who was part of Napoleon's generals under the French Revolution, they incarcerated or put to jail Pope Pius VI. And so political power was taken away from the church in 1798. And he would note that the difference between 1798 and 538 AD is exactly 1,260 years. And I hope that that is kind of clear to everybody, right? Oops, my bad. Right. Everybody okay with that? So we would have satisfied. Let me just go to the slide. Which I should have put at the end. We have satisfied all 4 criteria now. Had the eyes like a man and a mouth speaking great things. It wear out the saints on the Most High, persecuted the people. It thought that he was God upon earth. It sought to change time and laws, change his Sabbath, and change the commandments. It was allotted for us a time, 2 times, and half a time, which was the 1,260 years, which is exactly what we just covered and what we just studied. All right, so clearly we have identified that the Roman political power that emerged out of political Rome is the little horn in Daniel chapter 7. But you heard that? Let's bring it all home, right? The point I want to make is that what this looks like is that from Daniel's perspective, as he looked at this, he would be seeing all of this thing. That's why I told you that Daniel, you got to be careful what you ask. So Daniel wanted to find out what happened to his people, and when so they will go back, and God gives him this whole long prophecy. So he's troubled by this fact that this kingdom will be so powerful and will have such great domination over God's people. But God gave a timeline. So at least Daniel knew it will not last forever. And then God went on to say to him, which is what we cover in Daniel chapters 7, 26 and 27. But a judgment shall sit. So he says, as bad as this king will get, judgment shall sit. And it shall take away his dominion, to consume, to destroy, until to the end. And the kingdom and dominion, and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven, shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. So let's understand what is happening here, and this is what we'll touch on next week. Daniel is told that while this king will last for a time and times and half a times, after that, at some point, judgment shall sit and take away his dominion. You can argue that what occurred in 1798 was also part of taking away his dominion. But this is an even greater and a more final issue being discussed here. It's saying that the greatness of the kingdom under the whole earth shall be given to God's people and the people of the Most High. This is saying that those who remain faithful to God will become citizens of God's heavenly kingdom. And that is extremely important, brethren, because history has told us that yes, this period occurred in history. It's called the Dark Ages. This period when people were persecuted, thrown into dungeons, people were beheaded, people were burned to the stake. That's history. There's a book called Fox's Books of Martyrs that talks about the fact, Book of Martyrs, sorry, that talks about the fact that so many people were put to death and died at the stake, and how many of them they were eaten alive by animals, etc. All of that occurred under the Christian church. And then if you add to that what occurred with the Crusades and how many people died under those periods of war and strife, you begin to appreciate that that is a significant period in world history, and therefore it is represented by Daniel in this chapter. But Daniel is then, he kind of summarizes what happens after this, and he says, but at the end of the day, Christ will come, which is a lot like what we saw in Daniel chapter 2, when we would have seen the stone cut out of nowhere and fill the earth, and basically that kingdom will have been dominated. So this ends on a good note that suggests that God will bring an end to everything. Let me also let you know that what we just discussed is basically suggesting a very high level of apostasy. Apostasy means that you are rebelling against what God has preached and what God has put down. So the church is going to create a whole system of religion and rituals and ceremonies and stuff that seems to be against what God had put explicitly in the Bible. And again, you don't have to take my word for that. Luther placed 95 theses on the wall of the church in 1517, saying exactly that, right? That is a historical fact. So I want you to appreciate that the apostles understood that. So here's what Paul said to us. My next slide. In 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-4, he says, now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him, that he be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit or by word, nor by letter as some us, as that day of Christ is at hand. Now I know this is all kind of flowery old language, but basically he's saying that you should not get deceived or shaken when changes occur. Now this is Paul talking after Christ's death, and Paul talking about what is to come in the future. What is to come in the future? Well, Paul is living in the early centuries. What is going to come is going to be the spirit of Dark Ages. He says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there be a falling away first. In other words, if you think that Christ is going to come just now, which is what a lot of people thought, he says before that happens, there will be a falling away first. And the man of sin will be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as our God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. I mean, this is as clear as it gets. So I know that language kind of hard for you to understand. So I went to the New International Version, and it gives an even clearer explanation, right? So he says, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered to him, we speak to you, brothers and sisters, not to become easily unsettled or alarmed by the teaching allegedly from us. In other words, he's saying that people will come and try to make it look as if they are talking on behalf of God, which is exactly what happened in the periods and the ages afterwards in the Middle Ages, right? So he says, whether by prophecy or by word of mouth or by letter. This is Paul talking in the New Testament. Asserting that the day of the Lord has already come. So he's saying that some people will say to you, God has already come and Christ has come. Everybody believes that, right? But he says, don't let, now goes to verse 3, don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed. Seek to change times and laws. There's a kind of unison between the language that Paul uses and the descriptions that we got in Daniel. So Paul is is alluding to the fact that this will happen. So I'm saying to you that there is a correlation, if you will, between the warnings of Paul in the New Testament and the writings of Daniel in Daniel chapter 7. So this Lord is revealed that man is doomed for destruction. He will oppose and he will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple. The head of the Bishop of Rome became almost like the Lord upon the earth, proclaiming himself to be God. And so, brethren, it is clear that the prophecies that we got in Daniel chapter 7 follow the parallelism of Daniel chapter 2, but went a little bit further and gave us a very strong insight into what will happen during the Dark Ages period, when the church became powerful, became politically strong, but also became weakened in terms of its theology and its beliefs. And some of the things that entered into the church under the practice of syncretism, which was really accepting beliefs from other areas so as to make the church more popular and more increase in quantity and decrease in quality. Those are the things that God frowns upon, and those are the things that were identified. So from a political perspective, we have identified the religious political Rome in terms of it coming out after the 10 horns, after 476 BC. It came up where 3 horns had to give way to the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Heruli, through some alliances with different emperors. They were able to get them out, and by 538 they were finally out. So the church became prominent after those 3 kingdoms that were destroyed. And then it sought to speak great things. It took upon itself emperor-type behavior and power, and it had kings coming to worship and bow down before the Pope and before the Bishop of Rome. And then on top of that, it sought to change times and laws. It aligned itself with Constantine and with others, because even after Constantine, during Constantine period, there was still the classical observance of the 7-day Sabbath and the first day of the week. Post 538, what we then found was that the church virtually cemented the first day of the week worship as the expected day of worship. And if you were doing otherwise, you were considered to be heretic and you were considered to be against the church. And you were basically hunted down and persecuted as part of the persecution we looked at. And then we talk about the fact that this horn power will persecute the saints of God. We accepted that is clearly something that happened. But the biggest one of all was that there would be a specific time period within which this would happen. After we deconstructed times and divine of times, we knew that represented a year, 2 years and half a year, which is 3.5 years. We said that if we use 30 days for a month, that works out to be 1260 days. And then if we are very clear, and mind you, this is not sleight of hand, this is not something I just come up with on my own. Historically, intellectuals who have studied the Bible as far back as Isaac Newton and some of the others, they too would have used the year-day principle to interpret certain sections of the Bible where it is applicable. And certainly after the growth of the printing press and the rise of information in the 19th century, etc., a lot of the early biblical scholars and historians over the years have also used this whole year-day principle. As a matter of fact, Gibbon in his book, which we discussed earlier, about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, he too makes a reference to the fact that they seem to fall very neatly within the prophecies of Daniel as given us in the Bible. And that says that given the fact that we could identify significant events in terms of the rise of the bishop and the destruction of the bishop in 1719, and it fits so neatly, then clearly this is what it means. All of that is saying that God was simply telling us what will happen, but ultimately, what is really important is that one day, God will establish his kingdom. Sometimes when we read all this, we become very apprehensive and they want to fall into all this kind of thing. But the fact is, it lands into the belief that in truth and in fact, one day God will establish his kingdom. So I have a question for one of my favorite students. It says, so seeing that Daniel's vision is parallel to the book of Revelation, is the Antichrist the Pope? That's a big one. I think it's important to recognize that when we get into Revelation, we'll get into the Antichrist. But that word Antichrist is I find sometimes to be a little bit misleading, because you can get caught up into that, right? So I think when Paul used the word Antichrist, he was really speaking about the fact that those who are going to perpetuate a system and a basis that is treacherous to what God believes. So I won't say the Pope is the Antichrist. I'm saying that the system of religion that is encapsulated and managed by the Christian church under the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, is a system of religion that is against what God believes. What we will note when we get into Revelation is that just as how when we studied Babylon, and we talk about the fact that Babylon loves to convert and to control your mind, Revelation will use that symbolism of Babylon a lot to describe those things that are going to be against God's people in the last days. Similarly, you would find that Revelation would use a lot and build a lot on what we just discussed around the way the Roman Empire behaved during this period, and that you will see that perpetuated going forward. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we will discover soon enough is that this capturing of the Pope in 1798 is actually aligned to another biblical reference that we'll come to, that says that it will receive a deadly wound, which is what we encounter the use of the term in Revelation. But it then says that the wound will be healed, because in truth and in fact, the church was not destroyed when this happened, but the church continued. So in short, I want to say to you that we try not to align Antichrist to a person. You know, I told people I grew up in the days, in the 80s, when Omen was the big movie, and you look for the man who had the 666 stamp, and he said, we'll deal with all of that when we get to Revelation. But the fact is, don't get distracted into looking for a person, but more importantly, understand that if there is a system of religion that takes away from the importance of what God does, then you begin to appreciate that we're in a different space. When we get to Daniel chapter 8, one of the things that we will discuss very significantly is that the Roman church during this period created a system of religion that obscured, take my word now very carefully, obscured the work of Jesus Christ in the heavenly sanctuary as our intercessor and the one who administers on our behalf. When we studied the sanctuary a few weeks ago, we said that the sanctuary represented Jesus as the Lamb and also as a high priest. If you set up a system of religion where you are paying a priest for getting your sins approved through indulgences, etc., you are effectively obscuring the work of Jesus in the heavenly sanctuary. And that is a key belief that we must never obscure, and God frowns upon that as well. All right, so somebody asks, where did Egypt fall in the 10 nations? So we don't have, if I go back to my slide, and I suppose I'm open to questions at this point in time because this was my last slide. So let me go back, and that was a question that was lingering from, let me say lingering from last week, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. So when we, these were the 10 tribes, if you will, and if you notice, most of them, all of them, to a large extent, are in northern Mediterranean Sea. All right, so that's where the 10 tribes are. And that is why we can easily say that they morphed, they evolved into what is today modern day Europe. So Egypt is not in this mix per se. The fact is, once Rome is no longer in play, based on our map. Once Rome is no longer in play, Egypt, which should have been existing on the top here, they would no longer be controlled by the Roman Empire, because they are fighting the battles and making sure that Egyptian society remained dominant and stuff, right? So that is also important to note, that Egypt wasn't really figuring in the 10 horns. The 10 horns were really referring to the 10 tribes that existed to the north of the Mediterranean Sea, which is kind of where we are at this point in time. Any other questions from anybody? I know we've kind of covered some key points today. Today actually has been our shortest day, but it's a good thing because we've been covering some key points going forward. Everybody okay? Any questions? I know it's a lot. Take your time, and we will do a very quick review next week, and then we will move into the judgment scene. The judgment scene occurs from Daniel chapter 7 verse 9. And it's a very, very important scene because it introduces this concept of the Son of Man. Again, this is a easy one to guess because Jesus himself referred to himself as the Son of Man. When you see the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven, etc. So clearly, if we are seeing a judgment scene with a Son of Man involved in it, God is giving us something about Jesus and his role in heaven as an intercessor on our behalf. Any questions, anybody? I hope you all are not confused and you're okay. And if you are and you have questions during the week, think about it and let's pick them up when we start next week. You can always email me questions as well. Those of you on Zoom and those of you on YouTube, when we come back in next week, you can pick up any questions. Everybody okay? All right. Well, then it's time for us to offer a word of prayer as we close off today's session. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for your blessings. We thank you for your word. We thank you for the fact that you loved us enough to tell mankind about some of the things that will come to pass, not to frighten us, but to give us the assurance that you are still in control. We are happy that this chapter ends with the fact that you will establish a heavenly kingdom where the saints of the Most High can live with you forever. We want to be part of that. We want to be part of your heavenly kingdom. So bless us and guide us according to your divine will. Is our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. All right, everyone. Thank you all. That's it for today. Really appreciate your efforts. Next week, we will get into the judgment scene. And we'll pick it up here. I'm picking up a sweat from all of this, but we'll get into the judgment scene. And we kind of see where we end up as we go forward next week. Thank you all. Thank you all. Have a good evening. All right, today we ended. Let the pastor know we ended at 4. So we are allowing time for EY. All right. Take care. Bye.